Hello friends, hope you're having an awesome day today. My name is Orwig, and I am super excited about this tutorial because here we're going to take a look at how we can use Lightroom and Photoshop in order to improve exposure and contrast and the look in our photographs and create kind of a vintage or stylized look. Now, rather than jumping straight into Lightroom and then going over to Photoshop, what I want to do first is I want to step back and I want to share with you a little bit about the story of this photo shoot. I want to bring you along in the photo shoot, so to speak, so you can see how these images were captured. Then we'll select a couple of those photographs and we'll begin to work on them. Does that sound good? All right, well, let's dive right in. Here's out of Lightroom. You can see I'm in the grid view in the library module. I have some images that I want to share with you. So I'll press Command A to select all, and then N. The N key is a shortcut key for the survey mode, which allows you to survey or view lots of photographs. And this is a great technique if you want to share some images with people from a shoot. And then I'll press Shift Tab, which allows me to minimize the Lightroom interface. So here you can see some of these photographs. Of course, we'll zoom into them in a second, but basically the photo shoot was the story of these two friends. They were childhood friends, they went to high school, and so on until they grew old. And so let me show you some of those pictures to tell that story. Here is one of our actors, and here she is just showing up in her street clothes, and then here they are now in a scene where she's in high school and they're high schoolers, and you can kind of see the set and the setup, and there's some filming going on. Now my job as a still photographer was to sometimes shoot while the filming was happening, other times to capture those kind of iconic images so that those could be, of course, captured and saved and used for marketing and different reasons. So here we have this couple as high schoolers. Then there was a night football game. We shot all this fun stuff at night. And here they are now in college, coming back to their high school, and he asks her to marry him, and they're excited. And you can see this one's kind of a pulled back shot of the engagement. And of course, with all TV commercials and all filming, you do multiple takes. And so sometimes I'm shooting really close to them. Sometimes, in this case, I'm shooting below the bleachers just to get a different point of view. And that's a fun thing about photography. You can capture all these different moments and tell these stories. Like here, the story is she's getting ready in hair and makeup to be a mom now. And so this is her house. And then this is inside of the house, setting up the different shots. And of course, I'm not showing you everything. I'm just kind of bringing you along, a little sneak peek. And then she has this great vintage exercise bike, which was so fun. Here's hair and makeup, getting her dialed in and ready, preparing the shot. She'll have her daughter there in the foreground eventually. And in between filming, I wanted to capture a couple of shots of her on this bike because I just thought it was so much fun. So you can see here's one of them, and here's another one, and we'll be working on those photographs later. Here's her outfit, which is just so funny. And now she's old, and it was great. The hair and makeup, aged her, and I asked her, do you like being old? She said, not at all. And then here are the two friends now grown-ups with their own daughter. And then, of course, it comes time for their daughter to head off to school, and they say goodbye. And then the story continues. But just so you get a little bit of an idea on how all of that works, and to kind of show you maybe a little bit of a sense of some of the images, let me jump to this folder to give you a sense on some of the images that we have here. What I'm going to do is pull these up in this survey mode so you can see we have them as high schoolers on the left. We have them after college graduates, and now their parents here, and then their older parents, middle-aged, saying goodbye to their beloved daughter. And it was again, a really fun commercial shoot. So now that you've kind of seen the shoot, now that you know, okay, that's the context, that's what we're working in, let's choose a couple images to work on them. And the first one is this one right here. I'll press D to go to the Develop module, and I'll make my film strip a little smaller down there, and maybe press the T key to hide the toolbar. And now I'm good to go. And I want to tell you a story about this photograph, which was we were on set and cameras were rolling. And then when the cameras stopped, I could kind of jump in and take a picture. And I was so excited about this scene. I jumped in, I took the photograph, and it's completely underexposed. So devastating, right? Fortunately, I'm shooting with a camera with a wide dynamic range, which means you can pull a lot of detail out of the shadows, which is what we're going to do. We're going to fix an underexposed image. So I'm going to bring up exposure. Now, when I bring that up and let me exaggerate, the image just kind of becomes washed out or flat, right? So often when you increase exposure, you may need to do a little bit with contrast, add a little bit more snap back to it. Bring down my highlights there, bring up my shadows, and maybe add a little bit of clarity. And I think that's pretty good. And then go back to the color temperature. Now that I have good exposure, I'll go to my color temp And I want to kind of warm this up. We'll do more with color in Photoshop, but for now I want to have more of a kind of a vintagey feel here. And at this point, 10 seconds after making my way into Lightroom, I say, oh, good, this image, I can save this. So if you have underexposed images, just know you can save them. You can bring out some of that detail. Of course, it depends on your camera, your lens, your capture, and all of that. But the other thing you need to pay attention to is eventually you need to zoom in on the image, not zoom out. Let me zoom in there. You need to zoom in on the image. Let me zoom in to 100%. And you need to look at the details that you have and go to the detail panel. What I'm going to do is just remove any noise reduction here and zoom in past 100%. I'll go to, and let's go to 200% maybe. And what you can see here, hopefully you can see this, there's all this weird color noise. Let me go in really, really close so you can see this. See all that color artifacting? So we need to remove that with color noise reduction. Now with your detail and your smoothness sliders, I find I don't use these very much because the difference isn't that strong. It's mostly that color and also the luminance, which is going to be all the brightness, all those little artifacts. Now, you do not need to be at 400% when you do that. I was just zooming in for demo purposes. Okay, so now that I have my noise reduced, the image looks a little kind of too creamy, a little too soft, right? So I'm going to bring back some sharpening. I'm also going to reduce the detail because for portraits, that will protect the skin. And you can also protect areas by holding down the Option key on a Mac, Alt on Windows, and dragging your masking slider. And this will create a mask which limits the sharpening effect to certain areas. Whatever is white will receive the effect, whatever is black won't. So just like in Photoshop, white reveals, black conceals, same thing with masking here. And that holding on that Option key on a Mac, Alt, Windows, that gives us that little insight. Okay, cool. So this image is now in pretty good shape, and I'm ready to move to another image, but actually, I take that back. Sorry, I was hesitating because I was like, am I ready? I'm not ready because I see a problem. And what I'm seeing is, well, one, I was so excited I was able to save the exposure. So I wasn't really analytically evaluating the photograph enough. But then when I paused, I realized, oh yeah, you know what? This whole area is way too bright because our eye goes to areas of brightness. So I'm going to use the radial filter. I'll go to maybe exposure to zero everything out except maybe a little drop in exposure, big drop in highlights. And I'm just going to click and drag this over this area. Now, in doing that, if I tap the O key, it will show an overlay. And this overlay is showing me the area that will be affected. If yours isn't green, just press Shift O and you can toggle through the different views of that overlay, basically showing me what part of the image is affected. Now, what I'm seeing here, and let me just exaggerate a little bit, is that I have a drop in exposure and highlights in this area right here, which is kind of the right zone, but it's also affecting my subject. I don't want that. I only want the bright areas to be corrected. So we go to Range Mask, go to Luminance, and we click on the little eyedropper icon there, and then click on the image. And in doing that, you can see now the green, it's kind of hard to see, is only affecting this area. Now, if I tap the O key to turn off the overlay, I'll actually see whatever the effect is here. So you can see that's the effect that's taking place here. And maybe I'll just change this a little bit. And in that case, I think we're looking pretty good. One other thing I want to highlight is that with our range mask, we can change how far this is reaching into the darker tones or how much it's protecting those. With smoothness, if we want it to be really exact, we have low smoothness. If we want it to be smooth and feathery and natural looking, we increase that. Now, sometimes we'll make one adjustment and realize, hey, I need to make another, so I'll click New, and I'm going to drag another one out over here, drop my exposure down even more, and kind of fix this little area over here. And that one I'm just going to leave as is. I'll click and drag one more out over here. I feel like there's a little bit too much brightness in this zone, and I'm going to extend this one way down over here, and then go to my range mask, luminance. You don't always have to use luminance, and that's why the lower one I didn't use it. But basically what you're seeing is kind of reshaping the light, right? So that there isn't so much distracting brightness behind the subject. Now in front of the subject, I kind of dig that. I kind of dig the window light. I'm actually in Photoshop going to exaggerate that and bring out more of that. Okay, so here I'll click Done. Then I'll zoom back in on the image. And I know I'm going a little fast here, but hopefully you're following along and getting this. If not, pause, rewind, slow this video down. Here we'll go to the spot removal tool, and I'm going to use cloning, and I'm just going to paint over this little streak of light coming in from the window. And the reason why I want to do that is, again, it's a bright area that's just sort of distracting and kind of, I don't like the, maybe the way the eye is going to be attracted down towards that bright area. And I'm using cloning because it will just help things to blend in more than healing. Healing's going to sometimes have a tough time. I mean, we could try it, but I think in this case, because it's a carpet, because it's a pattern, because it's in the background, I think cloning will work well. I also should say that when we get to Photoshop, I'm going to do a little blur on this. I'm going to do a little healing on top of my cloning, so just a couple more little spots. And I'm doing this in case I see any repeating patterns that are kind of giving this away. And if you move your overlay spot, you can always find a new spot to kind of hide that. And you can also drop opacity, you can kind of create new patterns. But for all intents and purposes, I think that is fine. Okay, so that is image number 1. And you know what? Why don't we jump to image number 2 and do kind of the same thing so you see this one more time, except the second image that I captured, you can see my exposure was a little better. Still though, it's kind of too dark, right? And it's a little bit of a letdown. So we say no big deal. We go to the basic panel. We're going to improve our exposure, our contrast. Highlights were dropping way down. Shadows coming up. Now that we've done that, we bring up our temperature. So basically just a quick kind of boom, boom, boom. Jam through those sliders visually. How do we like the way the image looks? Okay, it's looking better. I also should say, we will take one moment before we go to Photoshop to evaluate and ask ourselves, is there anything we missed? Because I think there is, but I'll talk about that in a second. Maybe a little bit of clarity, blacks, I'll leave those right where they are, and I think that's pretty good. Now we notice there's brightness back here. We could, of course, do some of our work with our spot removal tool like we did before. Just paint over that and then set that source area to a better area. Cloning on carpet and patterns, more exact patterns like this, I find tends to work a little bit better. You can sort of hide it better than the other option of healing. Sorry, it's hard to talk and get this in the right spot. All right, next, let's grab our radial filter. We'll use the same settings as before. And remember, if it's not near anything, just like down here, we can just click and drag. We don't need to do any luminance or any of that kind of stuff. But if we're going to go up here and click and drag behind the subject, we tap O, realize, oh my gosh, this adjustment, and let me exaggerate it for a moment, it's affecting the background and also the subject. That's bad. So the O shows us that. Then we go to range mask, luminance. Luminance is all about brightness. And then we'll go ahead and click on something that's bright there. We can see the green is primarily now affecting that. If we, you may hear my dog Daisy, golden retriever, in the background there. She's always at my feet here. What I was going to say is, if you notice that this is affecting any other area, so I'll just tap the O key and kind of turn this off for a second. We realize, you know what? Yeah, that's affecting the background, but it's also affecting other areas we don't want. You can always grab a brush and erase. We'll grab a brush with the erase here and say, hey, make sure this is not affecting her arm or her leg or anything else like that. All right, now if you want to double up an effect, like you say, hey, this is good, but I just can't get those highlights and all this stuff dark enough. An easy way to do that is right click and choose duplicate. And what that will do is essentially give you twice the intensity of what you just had. Now, of course, you could change the smoothness, you could change the values here, and we're just sort of stacking up this effect so that brightness isn't as bad. Okay, let's click done. Again, I know I'm kind of talking fast, but I want to rip through this. I want you guys to kind of get a feel for a workflow. And this is a commercial photo shoot, so I got to deliver these images. I got to get this done, right? I can't just lollygag around. So we have these two images, and the thing that we want to do at this point before we go to Photoshop, this is really, really important. Before you head to Photoshop, you want to look away, and then you want to look back, or you want to close your eyes. And you just want to see the image with a fresh perspective, because you know what? No one's going to know it was underexposed. You know that, so you kind of feel heroic, like, wow, I'm doing great. All they're going to know is this. And so when we look at this, we just want to say, is there anything else that we need? And one of the things that I'm seeing is that we need more light on our subject. So let me fix that. So here on our subject, I'll go to develop. We'll go to, say, the same tools before, the radial filter, and we'll go to exposure. Boost its exposure a little bit, shadows up a little bit, and I'm just going to bring some light into this area. Her face, her arm, maybe right around there. Might bring a little bit of warmth there too. Then I'll go to my luminance mask, choose luminance, grab the eyedropper tool, and I'm going to click on the tones that I'm seeing that I want to brighten up. So can you see how I'm kind of working to brighten up her face and her arm there a little bit? We'll do a little bit more on the arm, I think, in Photoshop. But what that's doing for me is it's bringing our attention to her, to her wonderful smile. Here she is, this super mom exercising, and what is this, probably the 80s, right? And I should tell you too, this house where we filmed at and where I photographed at, they removed all the furniture and brought in new stuff. So the painting's new, the little duck there is new, the pillows are new, you know, to create this vibe, of course. Okay, let's go to the other one, this one here. We realized in that last one, we need a little bit of that. Let's do a little bit of that work here. Let's just bring in a little bit of that. It's almost a little bit of a glow, right? And so we'll do that. Go to range mask, luminance, same kind of thing. Again, just a nice way to sort of reiterate this concept and just bringing light where we need it to be. Almost like I had a reflector or maybe a little off-camera light that I could just pop in there to bring a little more light into the subject. And that's the beauty of Lightroom. You can light after the fact. Okay. So now we have these images. Let's tap the G key, go to the grid view, and let me make these a little bit bigger. And with these two images, I'm going to select them here in the grid view and go to Photo, Edit in Photoshop. And I'm ready to send these to Photoshop. And what happens here is Lightroom says, hey, everything you've done to these images non-destructively, meaning you can always undo this, I'm going to now apply to this file. And I'm going to send all those edits, those adjustments over to Photoshop. So now in Photoshop over here, we have those images available to us. And we'll go to Window, Arrange to up vertical so we can see both of these files. And I want them to have kind of a similar look, like they need to feel like they're in the same era and the same zone. And now I need to start thinking, how can I use Photoshop to improve the situation? And let's start off with, how about we'll start off with the image on the right. This will be kind of fun. What we're going to do with the image on the right is we're going to go through, I think, about 4 steps here. It's going to be a blur step, a hue saturation, curves, and another curves. So let me just zoom in a touch on the image. First is blurring this out. So I'm going to copy the background layer, and we're going to go to our blur gallery. So I'll drag this down to the new layer icon, and I'm going to call this new layer blur. I should say we're going to blur. We're going to hue sat, curves, and then we'll do some typography just to have fun here too. Make a little photo illustration. So with blur, we'll go to filter, and I'm going to blur gallery, and I'm going to go to field blur. Now, if you haven't ever used field blur, it's a ton of fun because what you can do is you can set these little nodes, these little spots on your image, and you can say, you know what? I want the blur by the window to be this strong, and so I can control that blur setting. Currently, and let me just exaggerate, you can see that this strong, 118, it blurs the window and everything else. But if I click to add a point on her face, and if I reduce that all the way down to 0, now her face has no blur. You can kind of see how this blur almost pushes into this and then transitions to where this is. If I push this closer towards this way, it's going to protect more of the area and push more of that blur out of range. So what we're going to do is we're going to add, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 of these little points. So I'm going to have one for my window over here, nice little blur. I'm going to have one for the carpet down here, blur that corner out. Over here, I'm going to blur this corner out even more. That's where the carpet that we fixed. The fireplace back here behind her, I need to blur that out too. Because really, I'm just kind of creating this vintagey, it's not like, this isn't photorealism, this is more illustration. But my idea here is to, and what I mean by that, this isn't like blur you could achieve on camera. Maybe if you had a plastic lens, or maybe if the image was faded or something weird. But I just kind of want to create that feeling of like, this isn't this perfectly crisp digital image, if you know what I mean. So I'm doing that with all of these things. I'll set a point to protect this area. So I want to make sure she's pretty sharp. I want to make sure her Reeboks, because those are just awesome, right? Her Reeboks are nice and sharp. The front wheel is sharp, but then we have kind of these other little blur zones throughout the image. So I'm just clicking, and like anywhere I kind of want to blur it out, I'll do that. I could go right here, maybe a little more on the carpet, blur that out. And so you just set the points and then change the value. That easy, that simple. And now we have this pretty, I don't know, I think it's a pretty cool look. I'm digging it. And the only thing we may want to do while we're here is we can go to the noise area and add a little bit of grain into that. What happens with the blur, it softens things out almost too much, but we'll add a little bit of kind of grainy noise there, and that will create a nice, little bit more realistic look from a film perspective. Okay, so then we click OK to apply all that. And if you were doing it yourself, you wouldn't necessarily need to take that long, but because I'm talking, I'm kind of talking through what we're doing. All right, so there's our blur. Now, remember I said I also want to do, some hue saturation. I want to do some curves, some typography. I want to do a little lens flare. So what can we do next? Well, just for the fun of it, let's say we look at the image and realize, yeah, I like this, but this pink wouldn't have existed in a photograph from the 80s. It's too hot pink. So I'm going to click on hue saturation. I'm going to go to the target adjustment tool. I'm going to click on that color. What that will do is it will take me to that color range right here so that if I change the value, you can see how it's changing that color. Now, if I drop this way down, I'm going to just drop it way down. You can see it's removing that color from here, but also from her skin tone, from the background. That's not so great, but we'll fix that. So we'll just bring it down to a range where we think it looks kind of cool, a little more muted. Go to the tab for the mask, click invert. And then what will happen once we do that is we will then tap the B key for our brush tool. We will paint with white. We'll use a brush without any hardness. A nice big brush here. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to paint in at 100% intensity this desaturation effect in these little areas. So it's going to only affect that area. Also this little bow, that's too bright up there. And you know what, you guys, I'm sorry I wasn't zoomed in on that. I should have zoomed in there. Let me undo that for a second. So back over here with my brush, you can see now, hopefully you can see that's better. I have this nice big monitor, so sometimes I forget that you guys can't see all of that stuff. So I'm just going to go over here and do it that way. Okay, well now that we have all that, we have our hue saturation taken care of. Make sure it covered everything up there. Next step, let's create a curves adjustment. So I'll go to curves, and here's a nice trick. If you want to flatten an image out, you just change the angle of the curve. So I'm going to really exaggerate it here for a moment. You can see here that I'm really flattening this out, but if I change this to a steeper angle, go the opposite direction, we're going to have more contrast and also color saturation. So what we're going to do is just flatten this out a little bit and then create a little S-curve here in the middle, bring some of our contrast back. But what this will do is it kind of creates a nice sort of muted look, and we have those highlights aren't quite so bright and white, but yet we still have a little contrast and just kind of gives us a nice little, little subtle snap. One more curves adjustment. This time I want to brighten up the skin tones on the arm. So I'm going to click to brighten that up. Same kind of vibe. Go to the mask tab, click invert, grab my brush tool, paint with white. And this time I'm going to tap 4 on the keyboard, which gives me 40% opacity of this adjustment, or 2 for 20% opacity. And basically what that means is you can paint this in a little bit slower. And take a look at this. I'm just bringing in a little bit of light in this part of the image. And so anything where I want to kind of draw more focus on, which is basically our subject here, I'm going to paint this little brightening effect in this way. Again, not a huge adjustment. I'm working quick, but that's helpful, right? Now with your brush strokes, option click your mask to see them, alt click on Windows. If you increase the feather, what it will do is soften those brush strokes. See how they're getting softer and softer and softer. What that means is that's going to kind of hide them. So if you really notice the brush strokes, just bring your feather value up till it looks more like light, not like you're painting these harsh little things on your image. All right, so far so good. We have this cool vibe. Let me just click through, make sure I'm kind of liking what we're doing here. This one, I feel like the shadows aren't quite there, so I'm just going to kind of tweak this. I actually feel like it needs to be a little more, yeah, like that, a little more, I don't know, what do we call that? A little more muted and flat and just, like a photograph or something. Film photograph. Okay, now 2 more steps on this image. And thanks for sticking with me, you guys. I hope you're enjoying this. And what we'll do is merge to top, Shift Option Command N-E. That takes everything we've done, that flattens it, that merges it up to the topmost layer. And on this topmost layer, we're going to do a lens flare. Now, you don't necessarily have to have all these layers when you're working, but I like to for demo purposes, so I can talk about them so you can see them. Here we're going to go to Filter, Render, and we'll choose Lens Flare. And with Lens Flare, what we can do is we can drag this little point around. We can control the brightness of the lens flare. That's too bright. Let's bring it down somewhere around here. Coming through that window, raking across the image. I'll click OK to apply that. You can kind of see we now have this fun lens flare effect. Okay, we're making great headway. Now, let's say for some reason, part of this advertising campaign has to do with moms and Mother's Day. So they say, Chris, will you also add some copy here, Happy Mother's Day, because this is going to kind of be this fun, vintagey Happy Mother's Day thing. So we say, sure, tap the T key for the type tool. I've already found a font that I like just to speed it up, but I'll type out happy right here. And then I'll move this over so you guys can see that. And we have our first word, happy, and then mothers, and then day. But before we get to the other words, here's a nice little fun kind of trick. If you double click the layer away from the word happy, what you can do is something like a gradient overlay. In your gradient overlay, even the one looks like I used last time, that's kind of cool. We can select these options here. That one's pretty fun, kind of matches the vibe. We could also do an outer glow, maybe a little bit, and maybe make that a little bit closer in. We're kind of going for this 80s feel, and then click OK. So we have that one word, one part of our typography treatment good. Now we need 2 more words. How can we quickly get those? Here's the trick. With the Move tool, hold down the Option key on Mac, Alt on Windows, drag it down, then double click, and then type in the new letters. So Happy Mothers. Now it's too big. Command T on a Mac, Control T on Windows gives you access to free transform. And then I'm going to reposition this and put it right where I want it, and then press Enter or Return. Now you may be thinking, that's kind of cool. That's fast. That's amazing. But I don't want that same gradient. No big deal. Just double click the gradient overlay. And here, let's go to, what else do we have here? Let's go to pinks. Let's see if we have any fun pink. No, that might be too faint. Yeah, kind of a pink and orange vibe for that one. Something like that. It's kind of too faint, isn't it? Let me see. What are other options? Reds. Let's see if there's any reds. Fun red ones. No, actually, I think the lighter it is, sort of the better. So maybe we just do some variation. We decide. Now as I click all these variations, it's kind of endless, right? Like you're like, oh, there's so much I could do, but that one's kind of fun, sort of the opposite of the one above. Then we Option click and drag down, double click, and we type the word day. And then we press Command Return on a Mac, Control Return on Windows, change the positioning using the Move tool for all of this. Double click that gradient overlay, and then we can find a new treatment for the word day here. And maybe this one is just where it goes a little more blue. No, I think we got to keep with our thematic approach here. We'll go something like that. It's kind of fun. Click OK. All right, well, there you have it. We have our kind of fun workflow, our progress, and we've done this with one image. So as we look at this, here's the image that first came in. We added blur in the background, which may be kind of hard for you guys to see, but I'm hoping you can kind of see how it's sort of blurred out some of those background elements down here in the carpet, blurred out a lot of that. And then we said, let's desaturate the leggings, also the bow back there. So we used hue saturation in a targeted way, which made it quick and fast and easy and fun. We did a little curves adjustment just to kind of change vibe. We did a little curves for the lightening of the arm, did a little lens flare, and then we have some of our type layers just to kind of have some messaging in here like that. Now with all of that, we get to this point and say, well, what if we've done all this and we still want a little different color on our subject? Well, just click below all your type layers and add another adjustment layer. An adjustment layer we could add, say, is color balance. It's great for color. We could go a little more, even in our midtones, we could go a little more red, a little more yellow. And what we're going to start to see is that, let me zoom out so you can kind of see this a little bit better. What we're going to start to see, let me exaggerate it, maybe go a little bit too far. Now we have this really golden-y, it almost looks like that Kodak kind of look type of film, right? And that might be fun, might be a little bit heavy-handed meaning just too strong, but it does I actually think it's kind of fun. So I'm going to leave it. I like it. All right, so we've done all this crazy stuff, right? We've worked on this image, and maybe at this point we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. We're like, yeah, client's going to love this. I love this. I'm happy. But then we remember, oh shoot, I have another image, and man, I got to get going. How am I going do the same thing over here, so these are kind of the same. Well, here's what we can do. We can go ahead and group a couple things together. Click in the top layer here, hold in the Shift key, the bottom layer, Command G for group, and we'll just call this type. And then we realize, hey, we want to bring all this over. So I'm just going to click and Shift click and actually bring everything over. So I'm just going to go over to the image over here, up to the little tab, and then drop. What that's going to do, it's going to drop in all this stuff that we have. And it's going to bring over some layers we don't want. So we don't want lens flare, but I'm going to remember where that is. We don't want blur, so I'm going to delete that there. But now, and I'll press F to go to full screen mode, you can see essentially what I did was I brought over all of my treatment, right? So I have this. This was the one desaturating. It's in the wrong area. I'll fix that. This was my kind of adjustment for the look. This was one for the skin tone. This was one for color. So what I need to do, and this was my type, is I need to fix up these layers with their masks, right? So I'll go to a mask, and this first one, hue saturation. In my case, my background color is black. So if we pull this out, and you see how black there is in the background color, I want black to be on my mask right there. So I press Command Delete. Windows, that would be Control Backspace. I'm going to do the same thing up here, Command Delete. So the mask is now gone. Bring this back over to the other side. And zoom in a little bit, maybe a little bit more. And I'll go to this layer and grab my brush, and I'm going to paint with white at 100% opacity. So I just change that or bring that all the way up so I can bring in this desaturated look. So those leggings have the same exact amount of desaturation. A little reflection there too, and then this little scrunchie or whatever that's called is fixed as well. Now this one, I'll grab brush as well. Change my opacity to something lower, either by dragging it down or by typing a number. And I'm just going to try to bring in a little bit of brightness into the subject, maybe her face a little bit, and her arm just a touch. You know, nothing major here. This one doesn't. I don't feel like it doesn't need it quite as much. And then remember, last time what we did was we double-clicked the mask, and we could add a little bit of feather there, and it had that feather from last time. So I'll just get that there, and that's getting us really close, right? It's allowing us to do 2 images at once. So what do we do next? Remember we had lens flare? We did that at the top of our stack. We also had some blur at the bottom of the stack. So if we wanted to make this identical, we go to the bottom, press Command J, name this one blur. We go to our filter pull down menu. We choose blur gallery and field blur. Now we already know a thing or two about field blur. We know in particular that with this we can set these multiple points on the image. So with this one, go ahead and put it over by the window. One on her face to protect that. That one has 0 blur. One behind her over here, subtle blur. Carpet down at the bottom. Yeah, let's blur that carpet out. Front of the exercise bike, great. The little wheel here, because I think that's so fun. That's kind of nostalgic for a lot of people who were alive in this era and remember these things. So I want the shoes because those are important detail in the storytelling, and maybe a little more protection here on this part of the image, and then the pillow is a little more blur. So I'm basically, as you remember, we're just kind of going back and forth and choosing how much blur we want to have in these different regions of the image. And then you can always stack them up. You know, you can have a lot of blur if you want to kind of build it up, have them close together, far away, whatever you want. I'm going to do one on the ceiling too. I feel like we need a little more blur up here, and then a little less blur on her hair. So protect that. Okay. All right. We've done all that. Let's click OK to apply that. Now we have our blur effect dialed in. That's layer number 2. And then remember, after we did all the color work, we don't have to do this, but it might be nice to do it. We merged to top so that the lens flare was connected to the color. So I'll press Shift, Option, Command, and E on a Mac, Shift, Alt, Control, and E on Windows. We'll call this one Lens Flare. And we'll go to our filter pull down menu, choose Render, and choose Lens Flare. Now we'll remember the same spot as before. It's a little bit different in this image. I need to drop that down. Same intensity or brightness value there. We can choose how we want that to appear and click OK to apply that. Because this is a separate layer, we can always turn this on and off. And then, of course, we have our typography. We could go into those type layers and say, hey, you know what? I need to move these around a little bit. Day should be down lower. Mothers, let's bring this here. And what I'm doing to select these is I'm holding down my shortcut key, the command key, to click on the type layer and then move it. So hold down the command key, click, move it around, hold down the command key, click. Now that's the command key on a Mac. On Windows, you just hold down the control key. Now I'm not saying my typography is perfect. I'm not saying my image is even perfect, but I think it's pretty fun. I think it's sort of a fun illustration. And more importantly, I hope you've learned something. I hope you've learned something about workflow, kind of going from start to finish, from being on kind of a big commercial shoot, right? And then taking these still images. And what you have to do a lot of times as a photographer is you have to have the vision for your images, even though you kind of capture something naturally. Say, no, what I mean by natural, it just sort of has a normal look. I'm gonna craft a look in this using Lightroom and Photoshop to enhance the story of what we're trying to do here. And it's the same thing that the guys and my colleagues who are filming do when they create the commercial. They color grade it. And it's that color grading which makes it go from ordinary to extraordinary. And so that's a lot of what we're doing here with these photographs. So hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. And as I mentioned in the beginning, you can download these full res files and work on these yourself. So if you haven't done that, I recommend you go back and try this one again. Try to do this yourself, because these can be some really valuable skills, not just to create a vintage look, but really to develop an effective creative workflow in order to tell stories with your photographs. All right, well, that's all I have for today. Again, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. If you would like more tutorials from me, put those in the comments. If you have suggestions or ideas or topics, let me know. I would love to hear that. Love to get any feedback that you guys have for me. Also, subscribe if you want to be updated when I release these. And I'm having a ton of fun creating this YouTube content, so would love to create more content that would be helpful for you. All right, have a great rest of your day. See you guys. Yoo-hoo!